Imagine this. Once upon a time, American cars weren't just vehicles, they were dreams on wheels. Detroit was the beating heart of innovation, where the Ford Mustang roared onto the scene, the Chevy Camaro set streets on fire, and the Cadillac symbolized unmatched luxury. The world looked to America for the future of driving. But somewhere along the way, that edge dulled. Imports from Japan redefined reliability. European brands reshaped luxury, and a scrappy startup named Tesla made American giants look like they were stuck in the past. How did the nation that gave us the muscle car, the pickup truck, and the assembly line lose its place at the front of the pack? This is the story of how American cars lost their edge and why the fight to reclaim it has only just begun. The decline began subtly in the 1970s when the oil crisis exposed the vulnerability of gas-guzzling American cars. While Ford and GM continued to build massive V8 engines, Japanese automakers like Toyota and Honda seized the moment by introducing smaller, fuel-efficient vehicles that resonated with buyers who were suddenly paying attention to miles per gallon. At first, Detroit dismissed these imports as cheap alternatives, assuming American customers would always prefer size and muscle. But reliability and efficiency became powerful selling points, and soon enough, Toyota's Corolla and Honda's Civic were household names, building reputations for lasting well beyond 100,000 miles, something American cars struggled to guarantee at the time. General Motors, once the largest automaker in the world, serves as a prime example of this slow erosion. For decades, GM thrived on sheer volume, producing a wide variety of cars across multiple brands: Chevrolet, Pontiac, Buick, Cadillac, Oldsmobile, Saturn. GMC quality often suffered as a result. Customers began to complain about poor build quality, failing parts, and designs that felt uninspired compared to foreign competition. Cadillac, once the gold standard of luxury worldwide, became overshadowed by the rising prestige of German brands like BMW and Mercedes-Benz. Instead of being aspirational, Cadillac became associated with outdated technology and an aging beer base, leaving GM scrambling to modernize its image. Chrysler, meanwhile, endured its own roller coaster of survival. Famous for muscle cars like the Dodge Challenger and Plymouth Barracuda, Chrysler eventually relied heavily on minivans and Jeep SUVs to stay afloat. While the Jeep brand maintained its rugged appeal, Chrysler itself often lagged in innovation, requiring government bailouts more than once just to keep operations alive. Even when new ideas did emerge like the Chrysler PT Cruiser in the early 2000s, the momentum never lasted, and the brand's identity faded in comparison to competitors who consistently evolved their lineups. Ford managed to weather the storm better than some of its Detroit rivals, but it too faced moments where its edge seemed dulled. The Ford Taurus was once America's best-selling car, admired for its practicality and design in the 1980s. Yet by the late 1990s, Ford allowed the model to stagnate, letting Toyota's Camry and Honda's Accord take the crown as America's family sedans of choice. While Ford's trucks, especially the F-150, continued to dominate, the brand's reliance on pickups masked the deeper struggles in its car lineup. The company tried to modernize with vehicles like the Ford Focus and Fusion, but these too were eventually abandoned as Ford shifted its entire North American strategy to SUVs and trucks, a decision that reflects both confidence in consumer demand and an admission that competing in the sedan market against Japanese and Korean automakers was simply too costly. Adding to this decline was the changing perception of American build quality. The phrase "made in Japan" once carried a stigma, but by the 1980s and 1990s, it became a badge of reliability. Toyota's strategy of building plants in the US further cemented their reputation, allowing them to produce cars locally while maintaining high standards. Hyundai and Kia followed a similar trajectory, initially dismissed as budget brands, but eventually improving quality so rapidly that they began to outshine established players. Meanwhile, American cars were often criticized for plastic-heavy interiors, clunky technology, and a lack of refinement, especially when compared to their European and Asian counterparts. And then came the 2008 financial crisis, a breaking point for Detroit. General Motors and Chrysler filed for bankruptcy and required massive government bailouts to survive, a moment that highlighted just how fragile the American auto giants had become. Decades of focusing on short-term profits, ignoring consumer trends, and producing vehicles that couldn't compete in efficiency or quality had finally caught up to them. While foreign automakers weathered the storm with smaller, efficient, and globally appealing cars, America's Big Three had to restructure just to keep their doors open. Even as recovery came, new challenges emerged, most notably the electric vehicle revolution. Instead of leading, American automakers found themselves playing catch-up. Tesla, an outsider startup from Silicon Valley, embarrassed Detroit by not only proving EVs were viable, but also making them desirable, while GM did have early EV experiments. With the EV1 in the 1990s, it infamously scrapped the program, leaving the door wide open for Tesla to dominate. Ford and GM are now investing billions to regain footing in the EV race, but the reality remains, they ceded the first-mover advantage, a mistake that could haunt them for decades. At the heart of this story lies a bigger question: how did American automakers, once the standard-bearers of global innovation, lose their edge so completely? Part of the answer lies in overconfidence, part in bureaucracy, and part in failing to listen to the evolving needs of drivers. Where once Detroit built cars that defined eras, too often it built cars that fell behind the times. And yet, despite the setbacks, the story isn't finished, because the American auto industry is still fighting to reclaim its position. Ford is betting big on the F-150 Lightning and Mustang Mach-E. GM is pushing its Ultium platform, the backbone of a new EV lineup. And Chrysler's parent company Stellantis is promising a wave of electrification across Dodge, Jeep, and Ram. Whether these moves are too little too late remains to be seen, but the struggle for relevance in the 21st century is far from over. European automakers played a critical role in reshaping what consumers expected from a car, and this shift only deepened the struggles for American brands. In the late 20th century, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and later Audi began to dominate the conversation around performance, precision, and luxury. Their vehicles weren't just modes of transportation, they were statements of engineering excellence. While Cadillac and Lincoln were still pushing large, heavy sedans with soft suspensions and outdated tech, BMW was building the 3 Series, a car that blended agility, comfort, and refinement in a way American sedans simply couldn't match. Mercedes pushed safety and durability to new heights, introducing innovations like anti-lock brakes and advanced crumple zones, while Audi carved out a reputation with quadro all-wheel drive systems that gave drivers a sense of control and confidence. No matter the conditions, the impact on consumer psychology was enormous. By the 1990s, when young professionals were looking for a car to reflect their success, the old American luxury badge no longer carried the same weight. A Cadillac Seville or Lincoln Town car couldn't compete in desirability against a BMW 5 Series or Mercedes E-Class. This shift wasn't just about luxury, it was about what people expected a premium car to do. Europeans had proven that luxury could mean precision handling, advanced technology, and sleek design, while too many American cars still clung to the old formula of bigger is better. Meanwhile, Volkswagen made its mark by balancing affordability with a European sense of refinement. The VW Golf and Jetta brought a kind of practicality and style that felt distinctly modern, appealing to younger buyers who didn't want to settle for an American compact that seemed cheaply made or uninspired. Even when Volkswagen stumbled with reliability, the perception of being more European kept many buyers loyal. And when brands like Volvo emphasized safety, or when Porsche elevated performance into an art form, the variety of options coming from Europe created a sense of dynamism that Detroit simply couldn't replicate at scale. Adding to this pressure was globalization. While American automakers were primarily focused on the US domestic market, European brands thought globally. They built cars that would appeal across continents, making their lineups more adaptable and diverse. This international mindset positioned them to thrive as global trade expanded, while US automakers often seemed stuck catering to the American suburban beer, leaning heavily on SUVs and trucks. That strategy paid off domestically, but it left Detroit vulnerable in markets where small, efficient cars were the norm, and it reinforced the perception that American brands couldn't compete outside their own backyard. Even the way cars were marketed revealed the cultural gap. European ads leaned into precision, engineering, and lifestyle appeal, while American automakers often recycled nostalgia or brute strength. Dodge's muscle car heritage or Chevrolet's like a rock branding resonated with certain buyers, but they didn't evolve enough to attract new generations. In contrast, Audi's Vorsprung durch Technik, progress through technology, became a mantra that embodied forward thinking, something Detroit sorely lacked during crucial Decades. This European influence didn't just reshape luxury markets, it seeped down into mainstream expectations. Consumers began demanding tighter handling, cleaner designs, and higher quality interiors, even in everyday cars. By the time Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai integrated many of these qualities into affordable models, American automakers were left playing catch-up across every segment. And all of this was happening just as new trends, global emissions regulations, rising fuel prices, and the first stirrings of hybrid technology were beginning to take shape. Detroit's response was slow, cautious, and often half-hearted, while competitors abroad were already laying the groundwork for the next wave of automotive evolution. The SUV boom of the 1990s and early 2000s seemed like a lifeline for American automakers, and in many ways, it was. Just as sedans and compact cars were slipping from Detroit's grasp, the sport utility vehicle emerged as the new face of American driving. Bigger than a station wagon, tougher than a minivan, and marketed as adventurous yet practical, SUVs fit perfectly into the American lifestyle. Families flocked to them, suburban buyers loved the elevated seating position, and the profit margins were far higher than what sedans could ever deliver. For a while, this pivot allowed Ford, GM, and Chrysler to reclaim dominance in their home market, with models like the Ford Explorer, Chevy Suburban, and Jeep Grand Cherokee becoming cultural icons. But the success of SUVs also hid deeper problems. Instead of investing heavily in innovation across their entire lineups, U.S. automakers doubled down on trucks and SUVs, funneling resources into what was most profitable in the short term. It was a strategy that worked until gas prices spiked or economic downturns hit. The 2008 financial crisis, coupled with soaring fuel costs, exposed just how fragile this dependence had become. Suddenly, consumers were no longer eager for large, fuel-hungry vehicles, and Detroit found itself without a strong lineup of efficient, small cars to fill the gap. Meanwhile, Japanese automakers adapted quickly. Toyota introduced the RAV4 and Highlander, Honda rolled out the CR-V and Pilot, and these crossovers offered everything buyers wanted in an SUV, but with far better fuel economy and reliability. Once again, foreign competitors had anticipated consumer needs more effectively than Detroit, leaving the Big Three scrambling to catch up. Even luxury brands from Europe entered the SUV market with models like the BMW X5 and Mercedes M-Class, further eating into the segment that Detroit thought it owned. Jeep is one exception worth noting, as it managed to retain a distinct identity. Even as the SUV craze took off, models like the Wrangler continued to symbolize ruggedness and off-road adventure, a heritage no competitor could quite replicate. But even Jeep faced challenges, especially as Chrysler cycled through financial troubles, ownership changes, and shifting strategies. The brand's survival often felt more like a stroke of luck than the result of consistent long-term planning. Trucks told a similar story. The Ford F-150 remained America's best-selling vehicle year after year, with Chevy and Ram close behind. Trucks became more luxurious, more powerful, and more expensive, morphing from pure workhorses into family vehicles and status symbols. These sales numbers helped keep American automakers afloat, but they also reinforced the dangerous reliance on a narrow segment of the market. For decades, trucks and SUVs carried Detroit, while sedans and compacts fell further behind global competition, and when the conversation shifted toward fuel efficiency and hybrids, Detroit once again lagged. Toyota's Prius became a phenomenon, symbolizing not just eco-friendly driving but forward-thinking innovation. General Motors did respond with the Chevy Volt, a plug-in hybrid that showed promise, but it never reached the mass-market success of Toyota's hybrid lineup. Ford's hybrid offerings struggled to gain traction as well, and Chrysler had virtually nothing to show in the hybrid space for years. By the time American automakers began to take electrification seriously, Tesla had already captured the imagination of consumers who wanted performance, range, and futuristic design. What made the SUV and truck boom even riskier was how it shaped consumer perception of American automakers. They became known as the builders of big vehicles, great if you wanted power and size, but not the first choice if you wanted efficiency, reliability, or cutting-edge technology. This reputation stuck, especially as global markets moved toward smaller, greener cars. While Ford, GM, and Chrysler thrived domestically, they struggled internationally, where buyers leaned toward efficient sedans and compacts. This raises the question, Did the SUV boom save American automakers, or did it delay the inevitable reckoning with global competition? On one hand, it kept the industry alive through turbulent decades. On the other, it locked Detroit into a dependence on a market that could easily shift with economic winds, fuel prices, or regulatory changes, and as the 2010s unfolded, that reckoning began to arrive in the form of electrification, new emission standards, and the growing dominance of foreign automakers in both technology and market share. The EV revolution hit Detroit like a lightning strike it never saw coming. For decades, American automakers had toyed with the idea of electrification, but always half-heartedly, as though they were testing the waters without ever wanting to dive in. General Motors actually had one of the earliest modern EVs, the EV1, in the 1990s, a sleek, futuristic car that owners loved. But instead of nurturing it into a breakthrough product, GM pulled the plug, literally recalling and crushing nearly every EV1 on the road. That decision became a symbol of Detroit's short-sightedness, especially as whispers grew that oil companies and automakers feared what electric cars could do to their profits. Then came Tesla, a Silicon Valley startup with no history in the auto industry, no massive factories, and no deep legacy to protect. Tesla did what Detroit refused to do: make EVs exciting. The Roadster proved electric cars could be fast. The Model S proved they could be luxurious. The Model 3 proved they could be mainstream. Suddenly, buyers weren't just tolerating EVs as eco-friendly novelties, they were demanding them as status symbols of innovation. And while Detroit was still debating how seriously to take electric power, Tesla was building an entire ecosystem of charging infrastructure, over-the-air software updates, and brand loyalty that felt more like Apple than Chevrolet. For Ford, GM, and Chrysler by then folded into the global giant Stellantis, the arrival of Tesla was both humiliating and terrifying. These were companies with over a century of experience in building cars, yet a newcomer had stolen the narrative of the future almost overnight. GM scrambled to tout its Chevy Bolt as the affordable EV for the masses, but software glitches, battery fires, and a lack of charging network support limited its success. Ford answered with the Mustang Mach-E and the F-150 Lightning, both impressive on paper, but plagued by production bottlenecks and skepticism from traditional truck buyers. Stellantis lagged further behind, focusing on global operations while promising electrified Jeeps and Dodges that were still years away. Meanwhile, foreign competitors weren't waiting around. European automakers leaned into electrification with bold strategies. Volkswagen launched its ID series as part of its post-Dieselgate redemption arc. Mercedes unveiled its EQ lineup, and BMW pushed forward with electric versions of its core models. Even luxury brands like Porsche stunned the market with the Taycan, proving high-performance EVs weren't Tesla's exclusive territory. In Asia, Toyota, along the hybrid leader, was cautious with full EVs, but continued to dominate with hybrids, while Hyundai and Kia surged ahead with models like the Ioniq 5 and EV6, which won global awards and captured consumer attention with futuristic styling and solid range. All the while, American automakers wrestled with the weight of their past decisions. Decades of leaning on trucks and SUVs had made them profitable. Yes, but it had also slowed their ability to pivot quickly. Their dealer networks, supply chains, and engineering teams were all oriented toward combustion engines. Tesla didn't have that baggage. It built its cars, batteries, and software from the ground up for the EV era. That's why when consumers thought about the future of cars, they thought about Tesla, not Ford, not Chevy, not Jeep. And this wasn't just about vehicles. It was about perception. Tesla made American cars cool again, but in a way that stung the big three because it wasn't their doing. They had been the giants, the innovators, the trendsetters, but they were now following a company that had been laughed off by Detroit executives a decade earlier. This perception gap is perhaps one of the biggest edges American automakers lost, the belief that they were the ones defining the future. Still, despite the setbacks, they haven't given up. Billions are being invested into EV platforms, battery plants, and new models, but the question lingers: can Detroit really catch up to Tesla and to the international wave of automakers who've already seized the momentum? Or has the EV revolution cemented their role as followers in an industry they once led? And as these questions swirl, another challenge looms, because it's not just electrification that's reshaping the market. Autonomous driving, connected technology, and the very concept of car ownership itself are changing, and here too, American automakers find themselves in a battle for relevance.